In the summer of 1969, a series of gruesome murders shocked Los Angeles and the world. These killings, orchestrated by Charles Manson and his so-called family, forever changed America's perception of crime, counterculture, and cult dynamics. The murders not only claimed the lives of innocent people, but also symbolized the end of the idealistic 1960s, casting a dark shadow over the era of peace and love. In this episode, we'll delve into the chilling story of Charles Manson, the Manson family, and the murders that made history. We'll explore the background of Manson, the formation of his cult, the horrific events of August 1969, and the legacy of his crimes. This is the story of the Charles Manson murders. Before Charles Manson became one of the most infamous figures in criminal history, he was a boy born into chaos. Manson was born on November 12, 1934, in Cincinnati, Ohio, to Kathleen Maddox, a 16-year-old runaway. His childhood was marked by neglect, abuse, and instability. Manson's mother was frequently in trouble with the law, and his early years were spent bouncing between relatives and reform schools. As a teenager, Manson began committing petty crimes, which escalated to theft and assault. By his early 20s, he had spent much of his life in and out of prison. While incarcerated, Manson developed an interest in music, philosophy, and manipulation. He studied psychology and learned how to read people, skills he would later use to control and manipulate his followers. By the time he was released from prison in 1967, Manson had become a charismatic, if disturbed, figure, determined to make his mark on the world. After his release from prison, Manson moved to San Francisco, arriving just as the city's counterculture movement was reaching its peak. The summer of love was in full swing, and young people flocked to the city seeking freedom, community, and spiritual enlightenment. Manson quickly began attracting followers, mostly young women, drawn to his charisma, musical talent, and promises of spiritual awakening. He preached a mix of philosophy, religion, and apocalyptic warnings, blending concepts from Christianity, Scientology, and his own twisted ideology. By 1968, Manson and his followers had relocated to the Spahn Ranch, a dilapidated movie set outside Los Angeles. Here, Manson's control over his followers deepened. He isolated them from the outside world, encouraged drug use, and convinced them that he was a messianic figure. Manson's doctrine revolved around a coming race war, which he called Helter Skelter, named after a Beatles song. He believed the murders he planned would incite this war, during which his family would emerge as leaders of a new world order. This delusional vision would soon lead to one of the darkest chapters in American history. The violence began on the night of August 8, 1969. Charles Manson sent 4 members of his family, Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, to the home of actress Sharon Tate and her husband, filmmaker Roman Polanski. Manson instructed them to kill everyone inside. Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant, was hosting friends Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, and Wojciech Frykowski at her home. Polanski was away in Europe at the time. The Manson followers arrived at the house on Cielo Drive just after midnight. They cut the telephone lines and entered the property. Inside, they carried out a brutal and senseless massacre. Sharon Tate pleaded for the life of her unborn child, but was mercilessly stabbed to death. The others met similarly horrific fates, with the killers leaving the word "pig" written in blood on the front door. The following night, Manson and 6 followers targeted another home, this time belonging to supermarket executive Tate-LaBianca and his wife Rosemary. Manson entered the house first to tie up the victims, then left the rest of the murders to his followers. The scene was as gruesome as the night before, with messages like "Death to Pigs" and "Helter Skelter" scrawled in blood. These murders, shocking in their brutality, sent waves of terror through Los Angeles. The randomness of the attacks left people feeling vulnerable, and the city descended into fear and paranoia. The Manson family managed to evade capture for several months. It wasn't until Susan Atkins bragged about the murders to a fellow inmate while in custody for an unrelated crime that police connected the family to the murders. In December 1969, Charles Manson and several of his followers were arrested and charged with the Tate-LaBianca murders. The trial, which began in June 1970, became a media circus. Manson, with his wild eyes and carved swastika on his forehead, captivated and horrified the public. During the trial, Manson's followers demonstrated unwavering loyalty. They disrupted court proceedings, shaved their heads, and stood outside the courthouse chanting his name. Prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi argued that Manson had used his followers as pawns, controlling them through manipulation and fear. He presented the Helter Skelter motive as central to the case, explaining how Manson believed the murders would trigger the race war he had prophesied. In January 1971, Manson and three of his followers, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, were convicted of murder and sentenced to death. Tex Watson was convicted later that year. Their sentences were commuted to life imprisonment when California temporarily abolished the death penalty in 1972. The Manson murders marked a turning point in American culture. They shattered the illusion of the 1960s as an era of peace and love, revealing the dark undercurrents of the counterculture movement. The case also exposed the vulnerabilities of young people searching for meaning and belonging, showing how a charismatic but dangerous figure like Manson could exploit them. For the victims' families, the pain of losing their loved ones has never faded. Sharon Tate's family became vocal advocates for victims' rights, helping to change California's parole laws to ensure that violent offenders like the Manson family remain behind bars. More than 5 decades later, the Charles Manson murders continue to fascinate and horrify. Manson himself became a cultural figure, representing a twisted form of evil. He died in 2017, but his story lives on in books, films, and documentaries. The case raises questions about the nature of manipulation, the psychology of cults, and the fragility of societal norms. How could one man wield so much power over others? And how could his followers commit such heinous acts in his name? These questions ensure that the Manson murders remain a subject of study, debate, and cautionary reflection. The Charles Manson murders serve as a grim reminder of the capacity for violence and the dangers of blind devotion. They show how manipulation, ideology, and desperation can lead to unimaginable tragedy. While the victims of these senseless crimes will never be forgotten, their stories remind us of the importance of justice, empathy, and vigilance. Thank you for joining me as we explored this dark chapter in American history. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into true crime and unsolved mysteries.